Hi, I'm Martin Pritikin, the Dean of Purdue Global Law School, the nation's first fully online law school. Welcome to this latest installment in our Distinguished Speaker webinar series titled The Changing Landscape of Entertainment Law. Entertainment law is always a hot topic, and our featured guest today, Ryan Nord, is well qualified to address it, having spent over 2 decades in the industry representing both studios and talent. After earning his undergraduate degree in political science from Berkeley and his law degree from Georgetown, Ryan began his legal career as a corporate attorney at Latham & Watkins. Then, following a stint at NBC Universal, Ryan built his talent practice as a partner at Hirsch, Wallerstein, Hayem, Matloff, and Fishman, LLP. And then 5 years ago, he and his wife co-founded their own firm, the Nord Group. In his private practice, he's had the opportunity to represent both established and emerging talent in traditional media, including film and television on-camera performers, television creators and showrunners, and feature film directors and writers. Ryan's also an industry leader in deal-making for podcast series, docuseries, and digital productions. So Ryan, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Marty. Hi, everybody.
Before we get started, I want to point out to the audience that you can post questions into the chat box, and time permitting, we will try to weave some of them into discussion or possibly at the end. We'll make sure to leave time at some point. So Ryan, before we dive in, let's make sure we know what we're talking about. You know, people throw around the term entertainment law, but what do we really mean when we say that? What is entertainment law?
It's a great opening question. And again, hi, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Marty. And thank you, Purdue Global and Kaplan for having me. The short answer is there are a lot of different career opportunities in entertainment law, as one might imagine. Just to sort of bullet point it, the first type of career one could pursue in entertainment law is that of course, litigation. There are, of course, contractual disputes, whether it be between talent and the studios, whether it be between the studios and the networks or their licensees or licensors. There could be disputes in financing arrangements. There's a plethora of potential disputes. So if one is interested in becoming a litigator, there certainly is a career path to entertainment specialty in litigation. It's general contract law, when it comes to litigation, not too much, securities or nuanced law, maybe some trademark, maybe some copyright infringement. But for the most part, the litigation is contractual disputes. Outside of litigation, there are also a number of different ways one can get into entertainment law. There are several types of entertainment lawyers in the transactional side. The first is, I think, financing lawyers. I confess I've never been on the financing legal side of things, but for every movie that gets made, every television show that gets produced, every major studio that finances television shows like Warner Brothers, Sony, et cetera, all of them have some form of third-party financing, whether it is credit facilities or whether it's independent investors in the independent film finance area. You can certainly find your way into the transactional finance world. In addition to that, when and if a show is up and running, there are production lawyers. What that means is there are lawyers that are needed inside the studios, inside the production companies that will need to negotiate across from those of us who represent the talent. They will need to secure rights, like secure the rights to screenplays and to pilot scripts so that they acquire the copyright to shows. Then once the show is actually into production, they'll need to hire the talent. They'll need to hire the actors. They'll need to negotiate the deals. They'll need to negotiate the paperwork and get everything signed before cameras roll, whether those are directors, writers, producers, et cetera. And then, of course, there are those production lawyers who will need to do things like clear chain of title, do copyright reports, and make sure that they are free of any claims, or if they're making a movie or a television show based on a real life story, make sure that they are ready for potential third-party claims and trying to avoid things like defamation, invasion of privacy, et cetera. Finally, I think another subset, which is my subset, and it's a very unique subset, is talent, what we call talent representation. And this type of law really, I think, sort of found its way to the forefront maybe 40, 50 years ago. When some of my elder brethren on the talent side found their way into representing talent across from the studios and making the deals. Talent representation is a very unique representation. Most talent lawyers look for early stage clients that are just starting their careers, whether they're writers, directors, actors, et cetera, producers. And what we do is we end up signing clients and hopefully working with those clients for their entire career. Many of us work on a commission basis, like their agencies and management companies. So just by way of example, if Marty were to have a friend who sold a show to or an idea to FX Networks, Marty might call me up and say, "Hey, Ryan, Joe Smith needs someone to negotiate his deal." So what we will do is we will negotiate all of the terms of the deal, the acquisition price for the script, what he or she is being paid for more writing services, what he or she is going to be paid on the show when it goes into production as a writer and a producer, what their situation is on what we call the back end as profits. So the heart of what we do is we negotiate their deals. And when they get shows up and running, whether it's television shows or feature films, we handle all of their business and legal concerns pertaining to that engagement. So as you can imagine, in the life of a 6-year series, things are going to come up. We may have some contractual interpretation issues. We may have some relationship issues. And frankly, the value that most talent lawyers in my space bring to the table is not just their ability to negotiate the deals, but it's their ability to navigate complicated relationships with the heads of the studios, to make sure that the relationship is set the right way, to make sure that we are protecting our clients' creative interests as well as their financial interests all along the way. And so it takes a bit of a relationship building over the last 10 or 20 years, relationship building and a level of trust with the studios, so that when your client needs a studio to do something, we can call them up and balance the relationship to make sure that we have a successful partnership with our client and the studios. So that's I think a good coverage of how that's a good coverage of general jobs in entertainment.
That's a great overview. I'm curious, by the way, 'cause I know this sometimes happens in criminal law, right? You'll have defense lawyers who are repeat players who deal with prosecutors day in, day out. Sometimes their clients are concerned that the defense lawyers are chummy, so to speak, with the prosecutors. Do you ever have that where you have talent clients who worry about the fact that you have good relationships with studios, or do they understand that that's ultimately to their benefit?
It's both. It's both. I think what they expect from their lawyer is they expect us to be tough when it comes to the negotiations. They expect us to make sure that we make sure that no penny is left on the table, and they want us to be tough. But Marty, the studios expect us to be tough, and so it's a balance. It's a balance of both being able to go in and both maintain a relationship with that studio because this is their employer. This is not a dispute. This is not like we want to blow up the bridges, in between in between the client and the studio. It's really both, Marty. And I think that's part of the finesse of being a good talent lawyer, which is to both know that when you call over there, they are going to respect you. They are going to expect you to be tough. They're going to expect you to be aggressive, but they're going to expect you to behave. And they're going to expect you to be polite, cordial, and they're going to expect you to press them hard. And if you establish, and most talent lawyers have successful careers because they have found that balance, because they know when they call over the studio, they are both feared and respected, and at the same time, they know that they're coming to the table to solve a problem or to make sure that the relationship continues to work.
That makes sense, and I think that holds true in virtually any area of law. I'm curious though, people have this perception that being an entertainment lawyer is very glamorous, right? You're hobnobbing with celebrities.
Mhm.
How accurate would you say that is on the whole? Do you find it to
I
be glamorous? Do most entertainment lawyers find it to be glamorous?
I think the answer is it can be. It can be. I've been doing this a long time now, Marty. So, like everything in life, everything tarnishes, right? So, what I would say is, when I got into the talent representation side, well, let me take you back. When I was working at NBC and I was new to the business, it was very exciting to be invited to set. It was very exciting to go to a taping of a big show, right? As a 29, 30-year-old lawyer, it was very exciting to be part of it as the studio lawyer and show up and, shake hands with the producers and get to know them and see how television is made. That's exciting. On the talent side, we love celebrating our clients' success. So, Marty, when we have a writer, a director, an actor who has a movie premiere or a big pilot premiere or a screening, we want to be there to support them. We want to be there with them to show them that we're with them all the way and that all the hard work that's gone in. We're going to go ahead and celebrate and have a cocktail tonight and shake hands with everybody at the studio and wish everybody success. That's fun. But like everything in life, I think, for us talent lawyers, this just becomes our daily life. And our clients become our friends. Our clients become, important people in our lives. And we just like to be there to help them celebrate. Um, Look, was I certainly, when I worked with Julia Roberts years ago, was I excited to sit down with her, in Toronto and spend a half hour with her in person and get to know her a little bit more? Absolutely. But what you learn is, our clients, actors, writers, and directors are people too. And I've just enjoyed the personal connection that I meet with them. So for me, I don't know that I get excited about hopping on a plane to New York to go to a premiere other than to see my client and to see them succeed. I'm not sure at this point in time I get too starstruck.
That makes sense. And I'll say for what it's worth, my background is in business litigation before I was in academia full time, although I've still continued to do some litigation. And the majority of my cases were not entertainment cases, although some were. And at least on the litigation side, even if you're representing a celebrity, like anybody who's involved in litigation, they're usually pretty stressed out. It's not something they would have wanted to be involved in.
Right.
So there's something, yeah, I think a little exciting about it, but at the end of the day, like you've got a stressed out person with a problem who needs help solving that problem, and that's what you're there to do, and you roll up your sleeve and you do it.
That's right. Yep.
Now, how did you get into entertainment law? Was that your goal from the outset? Did you fall into it? How did that happen?
Marty, it depends on who you talk to. If you talk to a couple of my high school friends or maybe possibly a law school friend or two, they might tell you, of course, Nord's from LA. We always knew he was going to do this. I'm not sure that's quite true. Um, I graduated from Berkeley with the idea that I wanted to go to the best law school possible and set myself up for success, no matter what that is. I went to law school thinking I might be a litigator. I was a speech and debate, geek in high school and did quite well. And I thought, maybe I would get in front of the jury and try to convince them that somebody was owed $10 million or should go to jail. But I actually, through the course of my education at Georgetown, fell into a liking for transactional law. So I actually left law school with the idea, and this is actually worth sort of noting for those of you out there who do want to pursue a career in entertainment. There are not a lot of entertainment jobs for people straight out of law school. Most entertainment jobs do require some form of legal practice prior to applying. Uh, Ideally, some form of practice. I know this is sort of an ironic statement to make, but some practice in entertainment. What I mean by that is, Marty, someone out of law school might be able to get a first-year job at a big firm like a Fox Rothschild or a Frankfurt Kernet, where they have entertainment departments, and you might get a transactional job as an entertainment lawyer as a first-year associate there. In order to transition into the studio or into a talent law job, you're going to need to have that experience. But to answer your question, after 3 years of corporate law in San Francisco at Latham and Watkins, I made a decision that I was not passionate about mergers and acquisitions. I was not passionate about IPOs and public offerings or the corporate life. I was from Los Angeles. And to be honest, Marty, when I decided to move home to Los Angeles, I decided I may as well try to do what the Romans are doing. If I'm going back home and entertainment is the place where everybody if that's our business in Los Angeles and that's what seems to be exciting, I'm going to try it too. So there's a little bit of both. Maybe I might have had some ideas about being an entertainment lawyer in high school and college, but I didn't know what that meant, and I really didn't
Right.
know what that meant until I jumped into it 20 years
Uh,
ago.
And obviously for 20 years I've been dealing with law students, and not everybody knows what they want to do when they enter law school, but to the extent they do, roughly a third, I think, want to be human rights lawyers, a third want to be criminal lawyers, and a third want to be entertainment lawyers. Um, how beneficial do you think it is, or how important is it for a student to try and get an entertainment law-based internship or take an entertainment law electives? Are those things, do they really make a big difference, or is it more about the experience you get once you're out of law school? What do you think about that?
That's a great question. I think it's both. I think in order to get some of these jobs, you're going to need to express an interest, and some employers do look for, hey, did you take copyright law? Do you have some fundamental understandings of what entertainment law is? On the other hand, again, the way I came into it, as one example, is a lot of these employers also just look for artful, skilled, young lawyers who have been well trained as a lawyer. And what I mean by that is I had no entertainment experience. And if you looked at my class list at Georgetown, I had zero experience in copyright or entertainment. But there are some employers who will look at your resume and say, look at your resume, meet who you are, and say, look, you've got great experience generally, right? If you're classically trained at some of these big firms in the corporate space, they might say that's good enough. Because if you're smart enough to understand corporate transactions, or you're smart enough to understand general litigation, then you're smart enough to understand what we're doing and learn. You're smart enough to learn, the ropes once you understand that, start learning the concepts. So I think my point is basic legal skills will translate in a lot of these jobs. But at the same time, there's no straight line to entertainment law, Marty. I think the short answer to anybody who's really interested is meet a lot of people. Don't be afraid to reach out to people and make introductions. Once you kind of find your way into the business and you find some people who have befriended you or think that you might have what it takes, whatever that means, we're pretty good to each other. There are a lot of entertainment lawyers that want to help people, get into the business. And it is one of those industries where it's a little tacky to say, but it's a relationship business. As you get to know people, just like any other industry, I suppose, and you establish your reputation, it becomes easier to move around and find, where it is that you should land. But Marty, there's no straight path. The short answer is if someone is genuinely interested in copyright law or entertainment law classes that are on the curriculum, take it. It's certainly going to help you establish that you are interested in it, that you're passionate about it, and set you up for success. But I wouldn't say it's necessary. What's necessary is patience, and what's necessary is effort.
That makes sense. Now, a related question, you mentioned moving back to LA and then getting into entertainment law. How critical is it that someone wants to do entertainment law be in LA or secondarily New York? And this really is a question as much about the entertainment industry as it is about entertainment law. Geographically, is everything still centralized in Los Angeles, or are there opportunities for people in other cities to get involved?
Great question. I would say, for the most part, the heart of the entertainment business beats in Los Angeles. Okay. There are certainly career opportunities in New York because there are law firms in New York that have entertainment departments. Stage play law out in New York is, New York is the hub for stage play law. A lot of stage lawyers for the musical stage plays and for New York stage actors and directors and such. So New York and LA for sure. There are two other geographical areas I think I can think of that are growing in this space, and that is Atlanta and Nashville. And those who are listening in from Atlanta or Nashville who are in my business or in the business may not appreciate when I say this, but it's not quite, you're still not at the heartbeat. So if you want to be in the center of things, if you want to be working at a studio, representing talent, the short answer is LA and then New York. I think some of the stuff that's going on in Atlanta has to do more with production. And some of the stuff that's in Nashville has to do with same thing, production and maybe some digital production, digital distribution, et cetera. To be honest, I actually am not quite familiar with all of the practice areas in Nashville and Atlanta. But for the most part, it's New York and Los Angeles.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is going to be a kind of a too big question for an hour-long talk, or maybe even a semester-long talk. But is it possible to give very brief, high-level overview? People see movies at the theater, or they watch movies, at home and streaming. But what's the actual sequence of steps? How does a movie get made? What's the first step? And kind of what are the major stages to go from, idea inception all the way to production release in the theaters?
I'd be more than happy. And we can do it in a snapshot, but you're right. It would take hours to do it thoroughly. So the short answer is it all starts with an idea or a script. And the beautiful thing about the entertainment industry, so to speak, is that If someone is wanting to break in on the creative side, if you put your head down and you work really hard at it and you have talent and you have skill, the door is open, so to speak, right? But it starts with an idea or it starts with a script. And a lot of times before we sell the idea or the script to a studio or a platform like Netflix, to what we call develop it, to prepare it for production, what we will do on the talent side is we will try to what we call package it. Now, packaging has this asterisk to it because it was a practice that the agencies did and perform, and they were commissioned for it, but that's a whole different story for another time. Packaging, what I mean by that is if I've got a writer who's got a script, his manager or agent might say, you know what, Marty, we think that Ben Affleck would be great to star in this, and we think Christopher Nolan would be great to direct. So if my client is represented by a major agency or management company, those agents and managers, part of their job is to make the sale attractive. Oftentimes we go out with scripts and ideas without what we call attachments, directors and actors or producers. We might go out with just the script. And once we set it up and start writing it, let the studio, do the work and figure out who's coming on board as a director. So projects are sold in a couple different ways, right? But it all starts with the script or the idea. And needless to say, a lot of these movies these days are based on books. So it might start with a book, right? If there's a Tom Clancy novel that my writer wants to write a screenplay and adapt a Tom Clancy novel, we might option the book. We might take the script and the novel out. We might sell that. So step one, sell the idea or sell the script. Then once you've sold it to a buyer, what they will do is they will have their executives work with your client to develop it, meaning write it, rewrite it, rewrite it, and rewrite it. It can be a lengthy process. For those of you who don't know, it can take up to 5 to 10 years to get a feature film to the point where it is greenlit. In television, the cycle is a little quicker. In television, you can sell something in the fall, and you could have your show on air next fall. But that next step is development, formal development with the studio. And at some point, the studio executives, hopefully, fingers crossed, and most things, by the way, go to the studios and die. 90% of these shows that are sold in television and film never make it to screen and end up on the shelves at the studios. The ones that are lucky enough to get greenlit, they have put directors on, they hire directors, they hire producers, they hire their actors, they make all the deals. Once they've made all the deals and they've approved the budget, whether it's a television show or feature, same process, generally speaking, then they will greenlight it. And once it's officially greenlit, then money starts flowing, producers start producing, cameras roll. In that process, my work is basically done unless I get a call from my client to say something is going wrong or I need some help. What does the contract say? But the creatives go to work, they make the show, they go into post-production. And once post-production is done, they will then figure out when it is that they're going to release the show or drop the show, whether it's on a network or a platform or in the theaters. And the distribution process, something that we haven't really touched on yet. The streamers don't distribute, right? If Apple's making a movie, Apple's putting it up on Apple. If Netflix is making a movie, they're putting it up on Netflix. But if I have a client who's making a movie with Warner Brothers for theatrical distribution, they'll figure out the release date, and we'll all go to the premiere on whatever release date, and it'll be distributed in theaters worldwide, and then you'll see it on HBO, and paid television, and maybe you'll see it on streamer, and they will distribute that movie. There's also independent films that are financed independently, not by the major studios. And those films sometimes are made without distribution. Sometimes somebody will want to take the risk and finance a $10 million movie without a distributor, get the movie made, and then take that product to the marketplace. There are marketplaces, and they will find sales agents, and they will find distributors who will want to come in and make an offer to distribute their movie. And the lead time from start to finish, again, can vary dramatically. In the feature film space, I would tell an average client to expect at least 2 to 3 years before the movie gets made, unless it's fast tracked as a very hot project. As a television writer, I would tell you probably are going to get your answer as to whether you're going to see your show on air and make it or not within about a year or so.
Well, that's a great summary of a very long and complicated process, I know. Other than the time frame, is the development process or the entire process for television shows significantly different from movies, or is it pretty much track?
You know, what I'm going to say is I am not a development executive, so I couldn't give you a precise answer. But what I can tell you is one fundamental difference in television as opposed to film is um, in television, generally speaking, the writer that sells the project is the writer that sticks with the project and gets it to the finish line and then produces it with showrunners and with producers and directors and such not. They're usually part of that process. It's very rare that television writers get replaced on their project to rewrite it to get it to greenlight. The feature film development process is totally different. You will have movies where sometimes the original writer gets it done, but a lot of times you're going to have one, two, three, four different writers come onto a project to write it, to rewrite it, and rewrite it again, maybe even reconceive it. And that's part of the different gestation and process in development between the two. But I would need you to ask creative executives on the feature film side and television side to tell you more precisely what the difference is in the creative process.
So, the title of this talk isn't just entertainment law, it's the changing landscape of entertainment law. So I want to talk about changes that have happened. We're going to get to some of the very recent ones in just a few minutes, but I'm curious if you can provide any insight on this. So I was actually speaking with my 16-year-old son just yesterday about, why is it that most of the movies that are in theaters are the big blockbuster action movies, the Avenger franchises, things like that. My understanding is that because the movie industry is much more dependent on the overseas market, where, maybe dialogue is less, it's less dependent on, the understanding the language and the dialogue. Is that accurate? Has the influence of the overseas market changed the dynamics of the movie industry?
I think that's part of it. But I'm going to take everybody back to when we all saw Iron Man, the very first one in the theaters, as our jumping off point for that question. Because prior to Iron Man, in my estimation, right? Who am I? But prior to Iron Man, there were movies with movie stars, and if we could look back to the 80s and 90s, much of the audience went to the theaters to see the movie star. They went to the theater to see Julia Roberts. They went to the theater to see George Clooney. We went to see movies like Michael Clayton, Pretty Woman, right? Some of these examples. That was the age of the movie star, if I can use it that way, right? Um, the big franchises, right? Let's take that moment when Iron Man was all of a sudden the big first Marvel movie that blew everybody's hair back. And to your point, yes, generated over $1 billion worldwide in distribution. The studios knew they had something. And I don't know that I can speak to the socio reasons why it is, that the audience, was more attracted to, or filled more seats, for these big franchises, right? Maybe it's just because if they're exciting and they're explosions and they get the movie stars. You get Robert Downey Jr. and you got Gwyneth Paltrow. They all get, relatively sizable paychecks, depending on who you are, of course, and what your stature is. And where you are in the franchise, of course, that's a different story. But I think the long story short is the studios learned that they could make a lot of money with franchises, which again comes back to your point, which I think is part of it. I think it's both domestic and it's global. And they realize that if you can make money with Iron Man 1 and Iron Man 2 and Iron Man 3, and all of a sudden you can go to the Marvel library and start to launch these big franchises, that's a way for them to make a ton of money. And I don't know that I can personally speak to why it is that today's audiences are not necessarily, going to the theaters to see the movie star driven movies as much as they used to. That's, great cocktail, conversation, I think, in the entertainment business to try to figure that out. And I think there are a lot of people who will challenge the studios and say, we've been doing this wrong. We should go back to, making mid-size budget movies. But the short answer is the studios have had a lot of failures, with a lot of those mid-budget movies that have been movie star driven over the last decade or two. And they've learned that it's the big franchise movies that make them the big bucks.
And, I think streaming and COVID have likely had a big impact, and that's going to be a lot of what we're going to be talking about next. I think the idea that it may be the natural evolution of, look, a big blockbuster, a big action movie with explosions and the special effects and the great sound really should be seen on a big screen in a theater. But if
Mhm.
you're going to watch a drama about grown-ups, a Michael Clayton type movie, doesn't really matter if you're watching that on a, 40-inch screen at home or a 40-foot screen, in the theater. Um, let's start with COVID. How, in a nutshell, did COVID impact the entertainment industry?
Um, Wow. I'm going to harken back now. So when we were all sent home that fateful, March 12th, 13th, I'll be honest, the first, I would say, 3 months of the pandemic was a state of paralysis. Like many other industries, right? So it primarily affected things that were in production or going into production, right? And so there was paralysis, and then there was the how are we going to make these movies? How are we going to make these television shows, during a world pandemic? And what you had was you had a lot of very different um, results. Excuse me, we had clients that worked on projects through the pandemic, and needless to say, they simply had to adhere to COVID rules, distancing, masking. It certainly got more expensive, I'm sure, on set. And then oftentimes, because one COVID case might pop up on set, whether it's the star or the person who's bringing bagels, the production assistant, if there was a COVID case, they could potentially shut down for days. Now, the real impact of it, which I think you're getting at, is um, so it was very difficult, Marty, right? Studios were having to figure out new ways to produce things without exposing people, right? And that wasn't easy. So the short answer is I think people felt their way through the dark and took it one day at a time in terms of the actual production. Um, but you also you hit on insurance costs. So Marty, a lot of these shows went down for a long period of time. Some of these shows actually that were greenlit and being prepped for production, I know of at least one series, never got produced for various reasons. Maybe they just rethought it, shut it down. But there was a lot of financing that was lost, right? There was a lot of money that was left on the table, and there were a lot of insurance claims. And so, what really came out of COVID, Marty, when it comes to what has impacted our business coming out of COVID, are the insurance costs. All of the studios were hit with multi-million-dollar insurance costs, where they had to apply for, insurance. They had to make insurance claims for the money that they lost, whether it was on, contractual payments to talent, contractual payments to below the line people, leases that they had secured for studios, for locations, et cetera. So there was a lot of financial loss inside the studios as a result of COVID. And I'd say that was the first strike, against the business from a financial perspective as we made it through the strike. I would say though, as the pandemic, we learned to live with it over that 3 or 4 year period. The business found its way back. But just like any other industry, we had to find our way back. It was just one step at a time, figuring out how we can continue to develop things, how we can get things into production safely, and make sure to do so with, strict COVID protocols. I would say to you, just like the rest of the world now, we're well past the COVID concerns. I don't know that they're really clamping down on too many COVID protocols, other than if you're visiting set, they might make you take a COVID test and swab you and make sure that you're negative before you step on set.
And you mentioned the word strike. So another huge impact recently was the SAG-AFTRA strike and the Writers Guild strike. What brought those strikes about? And for those who aren't familiar, how did those get resolved, if they did, ultimately?
Great question. This will take a big deep breath. A little bit of background on how streaming and distribution impacted the talent. Okay. Um, 10, 20 years ago, when the guilds started to address, and when I speak of guilds, just so we're clear, there is the Writers Guild of America, there is the Directors Guild of America, and there is SAG-AFTRA. Those are the three big guilds that have, teeth, and have, collective bargaining agreements with all of the studios. And in those collective bargaining agreements, 20 years ago, when we were making what we called webisodes, right, before the advent of streaming, there was a negotiation that was had over what the residual payments would be for the guild members on projects. And right there, I want to pause and just make sure everybody understands what residuals are and how they work. Historically, before streaming, residuals were paid to the talent based on licenses that were secured for the distribution of the shows. So as long as your movie, Marty, if you're a movie star, if you're in the movie, if you're a director and a member of the guild, as long as we are seeing your project out there, again, name any old movie, right, or old television show, Seinfeld, Cheers, right, anything. There's a license arrangement between the studio and the copyright holder and that licensor. And the residual requirements for each guild is there's a small percentage of that license fee that needs to be set aside and paid to the guild members as residuals. So, when people talk about living off of mailbox checks, it was absolutely the truth that if you wrote a couple, call it 5 episodes of Cheers, and those episodes of Cheers were going to be on channels 13 and syndicated worldwide, right? And, you see Cheers on every channel. You're literally opening up your mailbox and seeing what they call mailbox money. You may get a residual check on a Tuesday for 5 cents. You may get a residual check 3 months later for $5,000. And those residuals, of course, were based on how lucrative the license deals were and how long your shows were distributed. Okay. So then when the advent of not streaming yet, but digital, right, came into play, the collective bargaining agreement was negotiated between the studios and the guilds, and they set rates for residual structures for streaming. So again, just compare and contrast. If we have the old model, which is worldwide distribution, all sorts of different platforms, versus today's model, where again, you flip a switch and the show is only on Netflix and nobody is distributing the show off of Netflix. There's no license fee anymore. So you're not taking a piece of the license fee. You have to negotiate set rates. And what happened was, as far as the guilds were concerned, is they negotiated those rates 20 years ago without understanding where streaming was going to go. We didn't have streaming then, right? And so what happened was the talent and the guilds, through their guilds, were not happy with the guild's residual structure in the old agreement that had not been successfully renegotiated, over the last 20 years to, bring those residual structures in line with what the talent community thought that they should be. So one of the biggest reasons for the strikes was to readdress the residual structure. And in my estimation, they made some significant improvements. All of the DGA, SAG, and the WGA did make some significant improvements on those residual structures. For anybody who's listening, you can certainly just Google, new residual structure, coming out of the WGA strike or something, and you'll find some results, and you can read them on your own. So they did make some headway there, but that was one of the biggest issues. We'll talk about AI, I think, later on, but AI was also something that was a big issue that was raised during the strikes. So I think I've meandered a little bit. Maybe you can get me back on track, but that was sort of where as we were coming into this last year in 2023, it seemed as though the guilds and the talent community, that there was a boiling point. There was a boiling point. And over the last 9 or 10 years, there had been some marginal improvements made on these issues over the last renegotiations. But at some point, the guild said, we need to do better. And in order to do better, we need to shut it down, and we need to strike.
And
that was
so, yes. And let me ask you specifically, I don't know if you can speak to this, but for those of us who aren't on the inside of it, we heard stories about, for example, the cast of Orange is the New Black, right? How, they literally were working as baristas because they were getting checks for 5 cents, and that mailbox check for 5,000 wasn't coming, right? They literally They were the stars of one of Netflix's most popular shows, really what put Netflix on the map in terms of, creation of television shows, at least,
Mhm.
and weren't even making enough money to eat. Um, my understanding is, one of the challenges is, right, when you do a distribution deal for, syndication, you know exactly how big the audience is, how often it's going to run, how many times. But the streaming services are kind of a black box, right? There's no Nielsen ratings for them. No one knows exactly how much it's being run. And it's kind of analogous to the problem with Spotify, right? That if Spotify has a billion songs on it, your song might get played 10,000 times, but that's still only 0.001% of the total revenue. So you get a check for 38 cents. Has any headway been made in understanding what a rational and fair economic structure is to compensate talent for shows that do air on the streaming services?
I think the studios would tell you yes. I'm not sure the guilds would agree. Let me. What I want to say is, it's no secret that Netflix did not, for a long time, release its audience numbers. That was confidential information. They probably wouldn't even tell the talent. Maybe they would tell the talent, but it was under lock and key. You're right. There are no Nielsen ratings, and transparency has been the biggest problem, right? When it comes to the context of this argument, and Netflix kept those numbers very, very close to the vest for a very, very long time. Recently, Netflix has, if I can use the terminology, lifted its skirt a bit and decided to show a little leg. I think they are being a little bit more transparent with the public now, in my opinion, and maybe a few others. It's a flex, to show how dominant they are. But I think it's also in part due to the community pressure put upon them to start releasing some of those numbers. But I don't know that we're getting them all in transparency. I don't know that the community is getting, weekly or monthly reports. I certainly don't know of any where you're getting the actual numbers on every single show on every streamer. I don't think that exists. But in the new residual structure, there are increases, and I think what we will call, for the sake of argument, a bonus payment if your show does outperform or overperform on the service. I wouldn't be able to, without pulling my cheat sheet, I wouldn't be able to tell you what those bonus structures are. But they have contractually addressed, in their renegotiation and as in post-strike, there is a way for the residual structure to reward the biggest shows on some of these streamers. So that has been addressed in part. I don't know that you're going to find a lot of writers, directors, or actors saying it's enough, but at least a structure exists.
And you mentioned AI, so let's talk about that for a minute. That was another issue that was highly publicized as a sticking point with the strikes. I don't know if that was actually a big factor in the negotiations, but obviously it's kind of a juicy topic, so the media ran with that. How big of an issue is AI currently in terms of impacting the entertainment industry and legal issues in entertainment? I imagine, there's significant potential, copyright issues. And where do you see that going in the future?
I'm going to be a little general about this, Marty, because I think we're all still waiting to see, right? I think we're still waiting to see. But AI is, you're right. AI was very publicized, especially by Ms. Drescher, right, president of SAG, in terms of their fight. The WGA did also, both guilds, by the way, made headway. In the SAG agreement that has been renegotiated as part of the strike, there are lengthy, very complicated provisions that they have negotiated. Like it's a 4 or 5 page, new set of rules that governs, when an actor has the right to approve, any use of their image or recreation of their image by AI, and whether it's in the same production or a different production. It even has provisions that go to, whether it's approvals or payments to the estate, after someone has passed. So SAG has created a negotiated structure that gives the talent a little bit more protection, that they're either going to be paid, some form of a residual payment, and or have some form of approval process over the recreation of their image when it wasn't originally contemplated. The WGA generally landed with a prohibition on AI. So in other words, the guilds and the studios got to a point where, generally speaking, in the WGA agreement, there is a prohibition on AI replacing writers. Okay. Now, how does AI operate in practice? One thing to know, guys, is unless you have an extremely unique circumstance, when Marty the actor or Marty the director or Marty or Ryan the producer sign an agreement with a studio or a financier, you are assigning the copyright to your work. And if you are an actor, you are assigning the results and proceeds of your work to the studio so that they own the results and proceeds of your work outright. And unless, again, you have unique leverage, and movie stars do have this leverage, you don't necessarily have the ability to tell the studio that you can limit the use of my name, likeness, my name, voice, and likeness. Again, that's a negotiable point. A lot of times it depends on leverage. It depends on what the production is. It depends on, who you're working across from. But for example, if I do represent, Robert Downey Jr. or Julia Roberts, I'm probably going to have the negotiation leverage to have the studio agree contractually to go beyond the scope of the guild agreement and to agree to, parameters and prohibitions on the use of my name and likeness outside of that one production, right? So I would say to the working actor, to the working writer, your guild protections are probably the protections that you can rely on, and that those of us who are seeking to have employment as opposed to a movie star, if you're seeking to be employed by the studios, you're going to have to live with what your guild has negotiated for you. And the studios aren't going to necessarily say, yeah, we're going to negotiate anything special for you. Your guild represented you on this matter and what those rules are in your handbook. Now, from a creative perspective, this is kind of interesting. I think there are a lot of writers who both would tell you they do not and will not ever be replaced, by AI, by the studios. And I bet you there are probably a lot of writers who use AI to help their writing. Yep. So I don't know where that shakes out, Marty. But I think there's a little bit of both. And I think AI on the writing side might be a useful tool to writers in their homes. I would warn any writer that asked me as a client, be careful with copyright. When you're using ChatGPT, the copyright law, Marty, you could probably speak to this better than I could. I don't think the copyright law has been settled. I think we're going to see a lot of copyright infringement cases. I think we're also going to have cases where we don't know who owns the copyright. When a ChatGPT or AI generates something that a user writes and puts in their script. So I would say to any writer, proceed with caution. But if you're using AI to help your creative process, okay. Now, as far as the actors are concerned, I'm not allowed to speak to this particular circumstance, but I'm involved with a very interesting situation where my client, an actor, is involved in a production where my client is acting by providing his voice through a voice filter that creates the voice of a well-known actor from, say, the 1950s or 60s in like a big show. And he also has figured out how to mimic that actor's movements and gestations. And so with that big movie star or television star's permission and involvement, okay, not without it, my client is working with a tech company to basically recreate that actor's image and likeness in video form so they can create new content, but make it appear as though it's the actor, as if he, what that actor looked like in 1950. Wow. So again, take what I'm saying to you and put it in practice. It's not this, but if someone wanted to recreate Adam West as Batman, from the 1950s or 60s show that we all might have grown up, or I grew up sort of seeing, I'm not that old, but if you wanted to recreate it, they would call Adam West or his estate, the studio, and say, hey, are you up for this? And if he says yes, we are, and again, this is something that probably will be publicized in the next few months when this short film that I'm referencing is released. But it's pretty interesting to see an actor, right, who is picketing, right, on strike, get behind the camera and enthusiastically and with passion recreate the motions and recreate the voice of one of these stars. And so we may see, again, not a real example, but the example, we might see a short film of Adam West reappearing in the same form that he appeared in, and but at the end of the day, it's a digital image with a background actor. And so we're seeing tech, and we're seeing AI, and we're seeing a SAG actor come together, and start to create things that we couldn't do before. So
That is,
I think it'll be very interesting to see where it goes.
I think it's a fascinating topic. I'm not involved directly in the entertainment industry, but I've been following AI closely, both in higher education and the legal profession. I actually co-developed the AI law class, which we launched at our law school in January.
Mhm.
Um, but these issues are fascinating to me, and like you mentioned with like ChatGPT, right? So the state of copyright law in America right now is that a copyright owner has to be a human being, right? So you can't have a computer generated work that you can't have ChatGPT own a copyright,
Mhm.
right? But so where the juice is starting to happen, right, where the disputes are is, well, what is ChatGPT being trained on? And is its output enough, right? They talk about, the substantial, right, fair use doctrine, right, is a substantial portion of the original work. And depending on how narrow your prompt is, it may be borrowing substantially from some original work that is copyrighted. And so is ChatGPT violating it? And are you contributorily infringing on the copyright by using ChatGPT? So those are very interesting intellectual property issues. We've
Mhm.
actually got a few audience questions that relate to that. So I'm trying to sort of weave that in.
Yep.
Um, One quick question, and not a plug, but for anybody who hasn't seen it, if you're interested in these issues about use of likenesses, AI, streaming services, there's an episode of Black Mirror, I don't know if you've seen it, called Joan is Awful. Happens to air on Netflix, but it is an amazing hour-long episode that beautifully sort of satirizes, but also raises these issues about the intersection of these things. I'm curious, Ryan. I mean, I know you're not a litigator, so I don't know if you have thoughts on this, but kind of a related issue to what you just brought up. You've probably heard about how Scarlett Johansson, who was the voice of the operating system in the movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix,
Mhm.
so ChatGPT, when it was trying to roll out its voice version of ChatGPT, had a voice that some claim sounded suspiciously like Scarlett Johansson's voice, although she wasn't, it's not her voice, but
Yep.
it sounds like it. So just like there's issues of, well, appropriating someone's likeness, I mean, how similar can a voice be before you say it appropriates someone's voice? I don't know the
Yeah.
technology in terms of the voice patterns and the wavelengths and stuff, but I don't know. I mean, do you have clients who are people concerned about this issue, or is this just kind of like a niche thing that the media is picking up on?
No, it's an absolutely legitimate concern. Not to punt on your question at all, but you'd have to ask a more trained, copyright litigation expert than I in the entertainment business to answer like where that line is drawn. That might actually be decided by a jury or a judge at some point in time, right? And I think it's going to be very case specific in each instance. But you're absolutely right. Um, that is one of the issues that our actors are going to face. And for those of us with our law school torts books open, it's misappropriation, right? It is the misappropriation of someone's name, likeness, or voice. And Marty, I don't know that we're going to have a clear answer on that yet. And I do think it is going to be case specific, and I think it's going to also depend on, um, the whether one is successful or not at prosecuting that, like a lot of other litigation cases, is going to depend on who it is, and what resources they have to bring the claim against, these big companies that might be doing this. I wish I could give you a better answer on where that line is drawn, but I think for better or worse, we're going to see those things litigated more often, to your point, and I think we're going to start to see rulings in the next 5 years, and we'll start to see those lines drawn. But I don't think we have too many of those lines drawn yet.
I think you're right. And I think even when it does go to a jury, things are going to be clear. You think about like the Ed Sheeran litigation,
Yeah.
right? I mean, when you try and litigate the issue, how similar is song A to song B, right?
Mhm.
When there's only, 12 notes in the, scale and there's only so many chords, right? It's very hard to tease that out. Um,
That's right.
we've got about 5 minutes left, so I do want to kind of shift towards where things are and where you see things are going. So, Overall, how would you describe the current state of the entertainment industry in terms of its health, in terms of the challenges that an entertainment lawyer faces, and where do you see that going?
So I am going to plagiarize. I'm going to borrow a quote from one of my elder brethren on the talent representation side, the well-esteemed Ken Ziffrin, who's been around for a long time. He was front and center at the entertainment law seminar a few weeks ago at Beverly Hills, and to quote him, he said, "We're going in the wrong direction."
Mm.
And that is a culmination of what we've been talking about here today. The three strikes of pun intended. It was uh, the pandemic and the strikes and streaming contraction. We haven't talked too much about this yet, but right now we are going through a very difficult time where if you read any headlines, major studios have been laying off people because they are contracting. Major studios like Warner Brothers, Universal, Paramount, what they did is they realized that they needed to try to compete in the streaming games. They set up their streaming services. I'm sure everybody subscribes to some or all of them at home, whether it's Hulu, whether it's Disney Plus, whether it's Paramount Plus. They spent a lot of money on their streaming services. And unfortunately, they were not able to get the subscriber bases up to the point where they could be profitable yet. And so right now, what we're going through is a very, 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 and by the way, it was contraction and the strikes, right? You come out of the strikes and the strikes made things more expensive. The strikes put production on and release dates on hold. So the strikes had a very negative impact on the immediate, business. Like we all knew as representatives and the studio heads, we knew we were going to go through a hangover period coming out of the strikes where the studios had to figure out their new economics based on the new rates and the new residual structure. Things were going to get more expensive because of the new rates that were negotiated. So we knew that there was going to be a bit of a backwash for what we would have predicted 6 months after the strikes. But here we are now. We're coming up on a year after the strikes were resolved, and now what we're going through is we're going through contraction. You just need to read. If you read the headlines again, you're going to see that some of these major studios have taken multi-billion-dollar write-downs on their valuations. They are laying people off. Paramount announced that they are laying off 10% of their U.S. workforce.
Oh.
Paramount Viacom was in such a distressed situation that they put themselves up on the chopping block, and they're now being bought by Skydance, and they're in the middle of closing their acquisition by Skydance. Warner Brothers is publicly reported to be having, serious financial issues as well. So unfortunately, right now, among agents, managers, talent lawyers, studio executives, unfortunately, right now, the conversations are a little bit doom and gloom. The conversations are survive till 25. The conversations are because they're not producing as much. They're not greenlighting as many shows. They're not buying as many shows. They're tightening their budgets. They're cost cutting. They're trimming down. They're contracting. And so right now, I think we're kind of in the way I would put it is we're bouncing off the bottom. I think there's optimism that things will start to open up and feel better next year. But right now is probably not the most exciting, lucrative time to jump in the business. Right now, I think we're all hoping that we're going through, a very difficult cycle where we're going to contract, and then hopefully, fingers crossed, the studios, the networks, the platforms will figure out their business models and how to adjust to the new realities, and we'll all be back in business, in a more meaningful way in the next year or so. So right now we're going through some tough times. And again, that's no secret. Anybody who's reporting on the entertainment business knows that it's not pretty right now.
Well, I'm sorry that I ended things on a little bit of a down note there, but we wanted the real story, the inside story, and you were able to give that to us. Well, thank you very much for speaking with us today. This was, to me, very fascinating, very informative. Thank you to all in our audience who stuck around and spent an hour of your day listening to us talk about law and industry. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you look forward to our next Distinguished Speaker webinar, which will probably be in early 2025. Thanks to all those behind the scenes who made this happen. As Ryan knows, right, any production relies on people behind the scenes as well. And thanks all, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure. Thanks, Marty.
Take care, Ryan. Take care, everybody.